Without further ado, I'm going to share these slides rather, and I'm going to turn it over to Kevin. Kevin, thank you very much for helping sponsor this event today. We're looking forward to your message, everyone else's message, but I'll turn it over to you, sir.
Thank you, Daniel. Appreciate it. Hi, everybody. On behalf of Sertainty, I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar. As Daniel stated, we have a very diverse and experienced panel. Funny enough, all four of us at some point in time during our career worked at Bank of America, so there's some overlap there as well. Anyway, in order of people presenting, I'll start with Chris Feeney. Chris is the Executive Vice President of the Bank Policy Institute. Thank you, Chris. We have Tim Bird, who is the CISO of TIAA. And we have Ron Green, who is the Chief Security Officer for MasterCard. So as I said before, we have a very well-rounded group, and it's meeting interactive. So you have questions, send them in. And Chris, I'll turn it over to you.
Great, fantastic. Thank you, Kevin, and welcome everyone. I want to thank Sertainty and also my colleagues who are on the call. So, boy, what a year. Oh my gosh. You know, if you were to sit here a year ago, you'd never forecast what happened. You know, 2020 brought on a pandemic. It obviously traversed the world. And it really made the financial industry think quite a bit about how do we stay resilient? What kinds of things did we have to do to actually prepare for and support the business? And from that vantage point, the industry responded really well. I mean, you just can't really have a better response. Everything from deploying hardware to adapting policies to accepting risk in certain areas where it really was relevant to continue to run the business. But as you think about that, there's a lot of other things that changed besides the need to be nimble and adaptive and capable and to continue running the business. I mean, at the end of the day, we are a critical infrastructure sector and the economy has to run. You also had digital transformations, you had an acceleration of third and fourth party cloud use. And, you know, as recent news tells you that's a risk, right? That brings on certain things. And then you really had to really think through, how am I enabling the business, but protecting the information, the data, the personal information, the maybe confidential information that's firm specific. And the industry as a whole did a really good job with that. But it's really raised the profile of management's involvement and the importance of the board in this dialogue. And, you know, it just by coincidence, we had developed and launched a report with McKinsey. We spent about a year on it, and we've run a program for 5 years with boards where we really went through how involved is the board. This resilience moment has actually amplified that, and it's amplified it quite a bit. You know, the boards are involved on policy setting and governance, but this has sort of ramped up the need for management and the board to be involved. Management owns the decisioning, you know, where's the risk, how important is it, how critical is this business for us, and when and how do we bring it back or make it resilient, because a lot of this is pre-investing and some of it is responding. The board themselves have spent a lot of time in the boardroom talking about technology, talking about cyber, talking about resilience. We've seen meetings go from 1 to 2 to 4 to 6 and as high as 13 this year. So people are very active. We've seen the time on topic increase quite a bit, maybe from 15 to 20 minutes to 60 to 120 minutes in each of those meetings. And that gives firms an ability and management an ability, and the CISOs, you know, supporting these firms, the ability to really have a good discussion, to understand context, to put the cyber events or the resilience events in the lens of the industry, the lens of the firm, the lens of the customer, which is critically important. And that's really the big shift that we're seeing. And I think the pandemic is just an example of what would accelerate that. We've seen a bit of a shift as well inside the boardroom, who really manages this piece, who's responsible. We had, when we did this first survey, probably in 2016 or maybe 17, there were less than 6% of the firms had a technology committee. Now there's 22%, and actually the data from this study was from Q1. So we've just recently held some meetings, and we know that the number is even higher. And the committees are cross-populated, so they'll have risk committee, audit committee, and others in the room, which is fantastic, because there's then more of a flow of information. And the other piece is they've expanded to cover the innovation portfolio. They've expanded to better understand resiliency. So all in all, I think, the response was good, and that's fantastic, but a pandemic is a slow moving response and we need to always be prepared. The management teams and the boards are much more informed, much better educated, and we'll talk to that because really Tim and Ron spend a lot of their time as the people who do that, who really make that happen. And then as you look at the response side, on the right hand of this screen, security and resilience, the game has changed. And we have to be prepared, and we have to understand, what are some of the new, or maybe not new, because ransomware has been around for a while, but boy, it is certainly prevalent. What does it mean from an attack as a service type community? There's a whole business out there that's actually thinking about how they come after certain industries, financial being one. And what are the long-term changes? How do we really understand digital identity? How do we think about zero trust? How do we do the authorization through a process and continue to do that? And how do we think about supply chain risk and cloud security in an environment where many of us are moving to that more aggressively? So it's quite a year. I think what I'll do is turn it over to Tim, because he's really in the wheelhouse and spends a lot of his time thinking about these. So Tim, over to you.
Thanks, Chris, and welcome everyone. And 2020 has been one challenging year, right? I mean, just think about the pandemic that we're all living with, as well as seeing so many workforces make the shift from working in offices to working at home. And I'm sure, like what I like to do in these types of webinars is I really like to understand the audience here, right? So I'm curious, how many of you are doing 2 a.m. calls today, like, and getting calls, especially if you're in the cyberspace, or how many of you received calls on Sunday night? Maybe there was something happening where you received a call. If you could go into the chat feature, I'm just curious if anyone's receiving any types of calls like that, especially if you're in the cyberspace. I got a smiley face from Greg. So it does sound like there are some of you out there that are definitely getting those types of calls. And my point is that, the threat landscape has drastically changed. It has really changed, especially over the last 10 months. Chris just mentioned ransomware. I remember almost 2 years ago now, I would see, once or twice, maybe a month, we'd hear about ransomware. It's almost every single day now, every day that we're hearing about ransomware. And, the board is asking a lot of questions, right? A lot of boards are asking questions. They want to make sure, are we prepared? Do we have the right response in place? Do we have the right cyber insurance in place if we were to have to go down the path and execute it on the cyber insurance claims? The other thing that we've started to see, and this is new too, is we've always seen distributed denial of service attacks, especially within the financial sector. We've seen those over the last decade. But what's really changed is in the past, I'd say 10 months, is we're seeing now extortion emails before a DDoS attack is launched, where the email is basically stating it from the actor to the institution saying, if you don't pay us this Bitcoin by this date, we're going to launch a distributed denial of service attack. We hadn't seen that before. Previously, it was just we would see DDoS attacks on a case-by-case basis. No early warnings, but that's a big change that we've seen. And then the other thing that we've seen in 2020, on top of everything else, is phishing is on the rise. More and more phish emails, especially as it relates to COVID. We're seeing messages related to CDC, WHO, etc. And I'm sure many of you may have heard, and some of you even in this audience may have received an extortion email personally. One of the things that's been happening over the past year is old username and passwords are being scraped from the internet, and they're targeting those users saying, hey, I've got your password. And if you don't do something by a certain date and you don't pay us this Bitcoin, we're going to release all these photos that we have of you to all your favorite contacts, right? I know for me, I've had a couple of friends, even in the cyber field, reach out to me. And these are people in the cyber field that have been a victim of that. They've received the email. They know that you don't want to interact, and they'll reach out to me and say, "Hey, do you think this is legit? Do you think they really have this?" And so my point to you is, don't feel embarrassed. A lot of people feel embarrassed when they see those types of things. Make sure you're reporting. So if you see something, say something, report it up. And so as you think about building, your budgets, et cetera, and I'm sure many of you would love to have all the money you possibly can, especially for 2021. One of the things I think is really important is balancing the money you need with executing on the work that you have in front of you. I think a lot of times in the cyberspace, what I've seen is when budgets are being created, what we love to do is we like to think about all the different bells and whistles and toys and controls that we want to put in place from a cybersecurity perspective. But a lot of times what happens is we fail to forget that the business has needs too. So as the business is rolling out new enhancements, we have to make sure we have the capacity to be able to handle any type of review of those product sets before they're launched into production. So what I would say here is capacity is key. The other thing too, when it comes to budgeting, I have found it's been very helpful to have a third-party assessment. So it's one thing that I know where I think we should invest our money, but it's also another thing if you have a third party come in and say, these are some of the areas that you're really strong in, and here are some of the areas of opportunities. And a lot of times what I'll do is for those areas of opportunities, I connect that to the investments and then show progress. And that's key, showing progress for every dollar that's being spent into the program and how you're maturing that program. The other thing is, as we've moved our workforces to work from home, we've had to really recalibrate our work, right? We have to think about the security models that we had a decade, 2 decades ago to where we are now. I mean, you think about your own house. We are more connected than ever with the number of Internet of Things. I'm sure you have kids at home potentially that have all kinds of devices connected to the internet, maybe speakers, right, et cetera. So it's key to understand, what do you have on your own network, and are you patching it in a timely manner? And I think one of the things that we're going to see more and more is, as we start to go more to this remote workforce, it's going to be even more important that we start to think about, how do we move to this zero trust model? And what does that even necessarily mean? And, as the other types of things that we're thinking about too is, as we move to work from home across the globe, how are we making sure that we're still protecting the data, masking those sensitive elements like PII, et cetera, while we also provide the flexibility to workforces to be able to work from home? Because it's going to create a whole new area of concern with giving them that flexibility to work from home. When it comes to regulatory expectation and legal obligations, one of the things that I've always mentioned to my team and others is transparency is key here, right? And what I mean by that is, when something happens, it says a lot when we proactively reach out to the regulators, for example, if something has happened, versus waiting for the regulator to reach out to the institution. There are so many new laws that are continuing to come up, not only from a United States perspective by state, but also globally. And one of the things that we have to make sure that we're investing in is, do we have the right legal expertise and the compliance folks to help us be able to understand all those new laws, all the new privacy things that are coming out globally, not just locally within our own states and within our own governments. And then lastly, when it comes to boards and effectively working with boards and educating them and instilling the confidence within the boards, one thing I would say is that boards have to ask questions or they're not doing their job. So I expect boards to continue to ask questions, especially as a lot of boards are understanding and learning more and more about cybersecurity. Because one of the things that I think is most difficult, especially for technologists, are really just translating that technology speak into kitchen English that any board member can understand, any individual can understand. And I think that the other thing that's even as important is educating the board, educating them not only on the program aspects, like how we are investing our dollars, et cetera, but also educating the board on what is cybersecurity? What are the right questions, right? What are the right questions that they should be asking? And helping board separate all that noise from really the real issues. And I'm sure that, as Ron Green is also on this panel too, he's had a ton of experience interacting with the board. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to Ron.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. So I'm going to ask a couple questions as we go along. And when I ask the questions, if you could fill those out in the chats. So I'm going to first talk about my discussions with the board. As I'm talking about it, one question that I throw to you, if you could, if you got comments or you'd like to share where you are with it, how often does your team meet with the board audit or risk committee that's a part of the board? How often does that occur? So like Tim said, the conversations that we have with the board are key. They're very important. I think one of the biggest challenges that I've seen chief information security officers or chief security officers have with the board is oftentimes you can come across too technical. You're delivering information in a way that they can't understand it. And they're never going to be us. They're never going to be, the people watching the glass to see what attacks are coming in. They're never going to understand it to the level of detail that you do. So you have to bring it to a level of understanding for them that they understand and know what you're talking about. Some of the early conversations with the board, if you're the chief security officer or the chief information security officer, a lot of it's about developing trust in you. So for us, I used to meet with our audit committee every quarter and the full board annually. And a lot of those continual conversations were just for them to get to know me, for them to get an idea that I actually understand what it is that we're doing, and that I can talk to them in a way that they get an understanding around it. Because of the relationships that we have, some of them continue to just reach out and ask questions when we're not in meetings. And so now my schedule is pretty much every other quarter with the audit committee and still once a year for the full board, unless certain topics come up, like hot topics that they see affecting the landscape of other companies. They want to have a special discussion with me, and then we'll create an impromptu session where I'll have to go to the board. But our schedule is every other session that they have with the audit committee and annually for the board. And that's because I feel like we've developed a sense of trust. I deliver to them a dashboard every quarter, and they get a chance to go through that, but they know I've got the back of the company to do the right thing. So that's how we interact with the board. I also use a talking frame that I drive our strategy with, and I always come back to that. They see that same frame time and time again, and they understand how the topics that I'm bringing up fit into the overall strategy of security for MasterCard. The next topic I want to talk about is ransomware. As Tim said, there's been it's like this year has been an explosion of companies being attacked and falling victim to ransomware. So ransomware to me, it's like this thing that comes back in style, like fat ties or skinny ties. How once upon a time they were cool, then they went away, and then they come back. In my days in the Secret Service, before fraud actors or hackers actually understood how to use the data that they were stealing, they were doing extortion. They were saying, hey, if you don't give us money, we're going to release this stuff. And that's how it used to be. So we've kind of come back to that with ransomware, where they get in, and typically they get in through a phishing attack. And as Tim mentioned, with COVID, there's everyone's so anxious about it. They keep pulling on that same thread to get people to click on the link and launch the ransomware, which then spreads throughout the organization to catastrophic consequence. And because I just talked to an insurance provider yesterday, and 50% of the claims that they're seeing related to ransomware, the company pays up 50% of the time. Oh my God, that's crazy. It's very productive for them. So why not keep doing it? And so my philosophy and the philosophy of our company is to not pay. And the reason is, once they know that you will pay, you end up on a list that says they will pay. And so we should keep going back to the well for them to get more money out of them, because it's the easy thing to do. They will pay. So I would say, don't, one of the partnerships that we have is don't pay the ransom. And a couple things, another thing I'll say about it is just keep in mind 3-2-1 kind of principle. Keep 3 copies of it. I remember my days in the U.S. Army where we said, you got to make 3 copies, 1 for you, 1 for me, and 1 to burn so that the enemy doesn't get it. But in this case, you want to make 3 copies of your data. You want 2 different types of media, and then you want 1 location that's offsite. That way, if something bad happens, you have an ability to recover. For the ransomware question, I would ask you, because most of these are launched by phishing attacks, we actually have accountability models in place. So for our phishing testing, I know all of your company's phishing tests. If you're at a company and you don't, you should think about it. But do you have a consequence model? Can people be fired for not successfully responding to the phishing tests that you have? We have one. I'm happy to talk to you more about that if you have an interest in understanding more about it. Zero trust. Zero trust is a frame where, in the past, we used to, because you initially are accepted or authenticated into an environment, we then trust all of the actions that you then perform after that initial authentication. Zero trust applies to our people, and it also applies to our automated workload. So just because a thing is in our environment, a thing or a person is in our environment, doesn't mean that we trust them to do the next action. So every time an action is requested, there's an authentication that happens between the employee and the next type of service that they're using, or the application that's using one service and wants to use another service. There's an authentication that takes place, and it doesn't always have to be in your face and applied friction where, I'm asking you for the multi-factor, I'm asking you for something. It could be a passive check of something that you have, or it is something that we know that if you're the right person, you should have this thing, you should have the certificate, you should have, there should be the proximity of your cell phone near where we are. There are passive ways to continue to inquire or ask as things make a request of a new service or function. And if you're doing that, you make it significantly harder. You increase the entropy for an attacker to take advantage of your environment. Just because they break in doesn't mean they get to wander all over the environment. You make it dynamically more harder. For new forms of ID, look, when you're asked to present an ID, you're usually asked to answer a question. ID isn't, when you go to buy like alcohol or you go to check into a hotel, there's a question that they're trying to ask, which is, do you have the wherewithal to pay, or are you over 21? They don't need to know what your exact birth date is. They don't need to know what your home address is. They don't need to know your eye color. There's a lot that goes into the authentication of why an ID is presented that it just goes to answer a simple question. So as we think about identity at MasterCard, we think about it much in the way that we do a lot of our card transactions, where we don't actually we don't know the person with the card. There's a group that the issuer knows that person, and then the acquirer, the merchant, is actually interacting with that person to ask a question of whether or not they could pay. Same thing holds true with identity. We don't necessarily need to know the details of the person, but when the question is asked, hey, I am Ron Green, and I'm trying to buy some brandy because I have to think about all the security attacks, and I want to go to sleep tonight. So I'm being asked at wherever I'm making the purchase, am I old enough? So if there's a way to ask that question from the people that would know without sharing all of that information to the merchant, I think, well, we know that gives the person who's presenting the identification a lot more surety that I haven't over committed the information to an entity that doesn't need to know the rest of it. And I got the question answered very quickly. So as we think about identity, we think about just being a partner to make it all happen. There are people that will either have the driver's license or whatever identity piece of identity, and we can just service to make that connection happen. The question I would ask you to put in the chat is, do you have an interest in federated identity technology? And if you have, what might that be? Some of the things that we are doing, like in Australia, we've partnered with Optus to actually enable a digital identity to make it more simple for Australian citizens to get access to goods and services from the government. There are other things that we're doing in other countries, even partnerships that we have that are global, such as what we're doing with Samsung and MasterCard to collaborate with these organizations to develop identity solutions that could service the whole world. Finally, the cyber talent shortage. This is a topic that's near and dear to my heart. When I started in this field, this wasn't a field. I didn't go to college to study or be a cybersecurity expert. I don't think anybody knew what the hell that was. You know, I think maybe there were movies about hackers, war games that was out there, but it wasn't as demanded as a profession as it is today. Just recently, we can see that available right now are 600,000 roles that are in the cybersecurity field that are open now. The question I'll ask for this particular segment is, what's the oldest cybersecurity position that you've opened and then haven't been filled? And that's an interesting question. I would like to see people answer that. Some of the things that we can do in this space is actually engage earlier in a person's development or career life cycle. There are things that we're doing like with Cyber Patriot, where we're looking at engaging in with high schoolers or middle schoolers to get them to think about cybersecurity as a potential field that they can participate or go into. We've also engaged in a partnership with Microsoft and Workday, where we created this cyber talent initiative. And the website is the cybertalentinitiative.org. And in this partnership, if there is a college student that wants to pursue a degree, even an advanced degree in cybersecurity, if they're accepted into this program, they get to work for 2 years in a federal government agency. We have 11 government partners. They include the CIA, the Department of Defense, the FBI, and then 8 other ones. They work there for 2 years, and when they go to work for these agencies, they go in as an employee. So they have to go through all of the background checks. They have to gain the clearances in order to hold those jobs in those positions. And while they're there, they get an opportunity to experience real world conflicts. They're really engaging with the adversary. I actually often call the adversary the jackal. We call them the adversary, the jackal at MasterCard. We use that quite a bit. But these folks get a chance to actually face the jackal for real, to respond to government threats. And at the end of those 2 years, they get to join one of the partner corporations. Currently, again, it's us, Microsoft, and Workday. If they work for us for 2 years, then we'll pay off their college debt up to $75,000. And this is it's a remarkable program. I think of it as I'm investing in 2 years of solid, hardcore training for the person that I'm about to bring onto the team. I'm happy to have more partners join us. Between the 3 current partners, we'd love to have more people join this, because the cyber talent that we need, both in the government and in the private sector, it's just not there. I mean, there are roles that, again, have been open for a long time. My oldest has been over 2 years. We have like a little birthday cupcake for the role with 2 candles in it, because we had this role open for over 2 years trying to find a person with a suitable background. So the more that we can help people see the path, get them into the track, that's going to be more people for us to bring onto our teams in the future. So with that, I know we have more to discuss. I know Kevin's going to give us an update on his front, and then we'll have an opportunity to ask more questions of the panel later. So Kevin, if you could take it from here.
Thank you, Ron. Appreciate it. So I just wanted to just tell everybody a couple things. I'm going to cover 2 slides, and then we're going to run a 90-second video, and then we'll open it up to the Q&A session. So start thinking about your questions, because I'm sure you have a lot of them. One of this slide right here is just brings to light some of the components that was discussed in today's dialogue in regard to the current the historical security model, broken down between the network security, the applications, and subsequently the data layer. Within all this too, our procedures and policies have been put in place for different organizations and the like. But at the end of the day, everything is designed around the assumption that the data must always be available when it's needed. Okay, that on itself has created a lot of challenges for all the companies out there. Subsequently, current security approaches focusing on building elaborate defenses around this defenseless data. Again, we're all talking about the data, because that's where everybody wants to live. That's where the crux of the value of everything that we're looking to protect against is the data itself. Collectively, they become unwiley. The processes and procedures and the technology is very difficult to manage. They're designed to protect the information at the level at which is increasingly being targeted. Okay, which is at the data level, at the data layer. Okay. Organizations are, setting themselves up on their workloads, or including security workloads around moving to the cloud, third-party services, replacing traditional in-house and functional, functions and endpoints that's mitigated outside of the firewalls. Okay, so we talked about today about the different challenges of work from home and the like, and those specific challenges. But it's all about, at this point, the data is unprotected at the delivery point. And that's really where Sertainty technology lives. That's where we focus on, which is, it's making sure that the security travels with the data itself and extends monitoring, visibility, risk mitigants from both internal and external networks. Okay, Sertainty provides a practical way to affect the solutions throughout the life cycle, right? Daniel, next slide, please. All right, so this breaks it down in very simple terms: self-protect, self-mitigants, and self-report. Okay, those are the 3 different pieces that the Sertainty technology addresses to ensure that the data itself, the data, is protected. Okay, so we're going to run through a very 90-second video that really highlights and breaks down how the Sertainty technology works, how it addresses these challenges, and then subsequently we'll open up the the Q&A session. So Daniel, if you take it away, please.
Happy to. Please let me know in the chat if you can't hear it. I hope I've shared this correctly, but it's always better to know now rather than 90 seconds later. All right, let's get started.
In a digital world, data is more than information that connects us. It's now the ultimate attack surface. Where do you find enough resources to defend every piece of information on every device in your ever-expanding network? You don't. Instead, step into the future and make data its own line of defense. With Certainty, you control access to the information in your files wherever they are. By fusing the Certainty intelligence module with the data file, effectively rewriting its DNA, you transform it into self-aware data that protects itself. You can segment information within a file and determine when, where, and for whom the information is accessible. Each time the file reacts to an access attempt, it creates a reliable activity record. Certainty's self-protecting data enforces compliance without exception and eliminates the burden associated with key management. Certainty establishes a new standard in data-centric security that is only available to our customers. For the visionaries and leaders of today, the future of technology is here. Protect yourself with Certainty. For more information or to schedule a consultation, call, email, or visit our website.
All right.
Thank you,
Awesome stuff.
Daniel. So what we will be doing at the conclusion of today's webinar, we'll be sending out the presentation so you guys can see it, but also I'll be sending out my information to all of you. So if you have questions about Certainty, I'll be more than happy to take them on.
So I have a couple here. So first, everyone that's still with us, thank you very much. We've talked a lot about attack vectors, phishing attempts. We sent out emails as part of the campaign to bring awareness to this event. This is a part of a series. Thank you very much for opening that email and registering and clicking the buttons or copying and pasting the link. Thank you very much for that. This is a really great opportunity for you guys to ask questions of key leadership from prominent organizations. We've talked a lot about some prominent topics for 2020 and 2021. So I have a handful of questions here for the panelists. Go ahead and in the Q&A section, add your questions that you might have for our panelists here. We'd be more than happy to answer it. And we have about 15, 20 minutes to get to everyone's questions. In the meantime, I have a handful here. Let's see, going through this. The first one is for Chris. All right. Chris, so question for you. What are board members most interested in hearing about when you give an update?
So there's a couple of things. You know, the program we run is specifically for CEOs and directors, and the group in the room is quite talented, right? You know, the board members of the firms that that are part of our membership are quite accomplished is probably the way to say it. Yet they still want to have the discussion around the context, and there's a lot of ways to plug into context. Context is how prepared am I, right? Context is, do I have the talent? Context is, in the nature of a certain event, what does it mean for me as a firm? What is my role in the industry? So what does it mean for the role I perform in the industry? What does it mean beyond that? So the directors want to talk about, that in like those different strata, if you think about it, and they want to use the metrics. And it's interesting because we have a whole part of the survey that we do that talks about metrics, and they're very inconsistent. You could have the smallest firm having the most metrics and the largest firm having the least. But the idea is, what are you telling me that's consistent? I think Ron mentioned it, or Tim maybe, how am I making progress? What does this event mean for me? It's really everything but the metric. I always kid, I say the metrics are for the appendix, right? They're just informers for the discussion and the dialogue you want to have. And that's been the big shift is, they're both there's the formality of the board meeting and there's the informality of the consistent contact that CISOs are now having on a regular basis. That might be ad hoc, it might be interim between meetings, it might be in the form of a quick email to say, hey, this is what this means to us, because there's an event. And that's the type of information that's most important.
Chris, while we're on the subject, there's a great follow-up question from Greg McCord. Thank you, Greg. How much has privacy overlapped with security in the boardroom discussion?
I don't think it's changed much, right? If you think about our industry, we've been subject to GLBA, which is a specific privacy act, and we've always protected the data. I think the change maybe with GDPR or the California issuance of privacy regulations is the change. What's changed more is that how do you tie cyber, which used to be this independent vertical discussion, and operational risk and independent vertical discussion to each other? And in that conversation, you're saying, I'm protecting the data, I'm protecting my franchise, I know my high value assets, I understand my consumer, I'm making sure that I'm protecting them. So I think that the dialogue's gone horizontal, and privacy is just one of those elements that feeds the horizontal.
Awesome. Thank you. Ron, I have a great question here for you from Amir. Amir asks, Ron, how are DevSecOps initiatives working out at MasterCard?
Yeah, so it's becoming part of who we are. All of the engineering principles that we've learned from DevSecOps is going right into the development of our software deployment pipelines, or actually measures that we have to, check the readiness of the code as it's developed, and we use those to help enforce whether or not the teams have met their objectives successfully for the company. I think, clearly establishing what the goal is for when you bring it in, and then coming up with how you intend to measure it. That's key to making it successful at where you are. You get that up front, you get that buy-in with the dev teams, and like they see the advantage of it. It goes to helps to bring more value to them, because you want to make them successful. The metrics tied to it makes it all easier. So that's where we are with it. Done a lot with it and had a lot of success with it.
Awesome. Thanks, sir. Tim, I have one for you here. I love this question. How do you deliver bad news at board meetings?
Someone taught me this years and years ago with, how you report out to management, how you report out to boards. And the most important thing to always remember is news is news. It could be good news. It could be bad news, right? I would say some leaders are more mature that they can handle bad news, but I always remember that, right? Even when someone's talking to me and sharing with me something that's gone wrong, I always try to keep that level head and keep that in the back of my mind as news is news. So I use that when I go talk to the board, right? And I try to articulate the story in a way that they can clearly understand, just like how Ron was talking about earlier. I have found the challenge has been that we are so close to this space that we sometimes take for granted that we understand that technology speak, and the board doesn't. I mean, a good example of that is something that Chris touched on a second ago, which, by the way, I think Chris's program for educating the board through BPI is one of the best I've seen. And what I've found, and Chris touched on this on the metrics, right? Every firm provides different metrics, it seems like, to the board, right? And there's no right answer, but one of the things I'm starting to lean towards is that most of the metrics, again, they're back to what Ron said, they're in tech speak. That application, external facing, vulnerability, speak, it's in a language they don't understand. And I have found the most effective thing is to have a voiceover for a metric, right? You can put them in the appendix, but most of the time it's going to have some type of voiceover for it to actually resonate.
Very true.
If I could jump in on that one too, right? So take the emotion out of how you present it, right? Just if it's a bad news thing, be factual about it, present it, but also have what your plan is to remediate or fix the issue. If you go in and say, "Oh my God, it's the worst thing that we've ever had," and you're not inspiring any confidence that you know what's going on, and what's going to happen is they're going to say, "You know what? We need to get somebody in to really help. We need to get, because you can get more help than you need. We need to get more help in to go help them fix this thing." And that could be warranted. You need more help than you need. But if you're always in that, oh, the sky is falling, you're not going to inspire confidence within your board.
Agree. Love it. Thank you, guys. So Steve asked a great question. Steve, thank you for the question. He says, Chris mentions about boards paying more attention, which is great. However, over the past 9 months, it seems to have taken resources away from the businesses and put them into the cyber and tech teams. This has caused a fundamental change in relationship dynamic. To what degree do you see this persisting as the dynamic, hopefully, starts to fade with the vaccine? Maybe repetitive with Chris's answer, but He was still typing it out. That's a great question. Chris, do you have some thoughts on that?
Yeah, I was just reading that actually and trying to, it's interesting. We have not seen that as much. Like when we talk to, you sort of have two things going on. We've seen the investment in the cyber talent, right? And we've seen the importance of building that. And Ron mentioned how difficult it is to fill the pipeline and attract the talent. We've also seen, and I think there's two factors to this. One is the importance of the business is risen quite a bit. I mean, I think every business leader thinks of cyber as a 1, 2, or 3 highest priority issue, right? And we've seen the business try to get involved more. The operational resilience dialogue, which is a regulatory driven dialogue globally, is going to force that. So I think you're in this funny period where the business is trying to get more engaged. The cyber teams are trying to handle changes in the environment and the buildup of talent. I think it's going to normalize. I've seen a much different dialogue in the boardroom where the appreciation for the work these teams do is much greater. The knowledge about the types of events or the way they, protect against the events or recover, right? Because there is a recovery aspect to this, is more informed. So I'm seeing this as a churn and a shift, but in a very positive way. I don't know if that answers the question, but hopefully it at least taps into some of it.
Awesome, thanks. Steve, if you have a follow-up, feel free to put it in the chat. Ron, I have a great question here for you related to the Cybersecurity Talent Initiative and how other companies can get involved in that.
So one of the things that you can do is if you go to that website, there's the partnership for government service that we work with that actually runs it. You can reach out to them through the website or just reach out for me, let me know that you're interested, and I'm happy to connect you with our program.
Awesome.
Hey Daniel, can I just tap in there real quick? So we did about 2.5 years, 3 years of work with the Business Higher Education Forum, and we finished it in 16 or 17. And what Ron is doing is exactly what that group recommended, which is tapping into the lower streams. I don't want to leave TIAA out because they have a fantastic talent program too. And what's happened is many of the firms have sort of self-enabled or worked in these groups to do it. So, Tim's work, Ron's work, it's just pivotal to us filling the pipeline and having the right kind of talent.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate that. Frank asked a great question here. He says, do any of you guys have a risk appetite model or approach that you could describe for us?
That's maybe definitely not mine anymore. I can describe an old one if someone would like.
So yes, we do. We actually have for various topics, like we have a risk appetite for resiliency or business continuity requirements. We work with our risk team to develop how we express the risk appetite. I'll tell you that we've been looking more at quantitative models. So the FAIR methodology is something that we brought in, and so starting on the security and technology side, that's where we started with using quantitative. This is what our acceptable level of risk, and this is where we are with this particular thing. How does it fit into the overall appetite? And depending on where it does, that means it escalates or goes to the different risk review committees. So the FAIR methodology is something that we use, but we actually use these things as we talk to the board, but we're presenting them with our risks in accordance with our acceptance of risk in our appetite.
Love it.
And just one thing I chime in on that one as well is that we have very similar, right? And one of the metrics that we've been looking at lately has been from a risk appetite perspective is phishing susceptibility. But one of the things that we're revisiting is the threshold and that we have set, because with the phishing susceptibility, it's very interesting, right? So if I make the phish test very, very complicated and very hard to detect, most likely I will breach that metric, right? So it's trying to find that right cadence, that right, what's the right threshold to have that set that would trigger it to go red or yellow. So we're going to revisit that over the next month or so.
Awesome. Let's see. I think we might have time for one more question here. All right. So, Tim, this one's actually for you. What do you think is the most difficult topic or concept to explain at board meetings?
So I would say one of the things that I've seen has been the most difficult is trying to translate how we compare to others and the frameworks that are being used. And so, for example, on an annual basis, I have a third-party assessment that's conducted, and we use things like NIST, right? And from a board member's perspective, it goes from a scale of like 1 to 5, and you've got 18 categories, and no one's ever a 5 unless you're in the Department of Defense, right? Trying to explain what we are striving for and what others are striving for, so we have that baseline, right? So, and then there's always this conversation of, well, why not a 5, right? 5's the best, right? Why would we not want to be a 5 type of thing? And helping them understand that no other financial institution, for the most part, are striving for those 5s. It's a diminishing return on your investment. So I think that's probably one of the most challenging ones. I'm sure Ron has some examples too.
I'll agree right in there with pretty much all of the security concepts are explainable because you can create a physical frame that fits with most security things. But this whole, well, we're using this kind of framework. These board members, they're not just board members for MasterCard or your company. They're board members at different places. And so they're like, well, hey, we use COVID over here, or hey, we're focused on ISO over here. And you get this alphabet soup of frameworks. And that's why I know Tim's laughing because there's so many security frameworks that are out there. It makes it hard for us when we talk about any specific framework with our board. One of the things, so I'm also chair of the Financial Service Sector Coordination Council. We're very focused on trying to get harmonization around a standard. And we've been at this for, what do you think, Tim, 20 years? Just because people keep making new ones, and then this new one hits the board, and it's like, well, what does this mean versus what we're doing now? That is frustrating as security officers, because trying to fit in these frameworks does nothing to amplify security. It's just another thing we got to check in a different way. So that's a pain point. We got to solve it. It's 20 years later, and we still haven't, but we've got to make it better for the people in the future.
And Dan, I'm going to jump on that because Ron and I are jointly there. And we did, as an industry, we spent 5 years building a sector profile built on NIST. And it's actually working, right? It was a consolidation of ISO and NIST and the CAT tool, and you can go down the list. It has international standards. The regulators, for those on the call, the regulators are helping us with it, right? Because they see the same, sort of challenge of different languages, and the fact that pulls a security expert off the line into a compliance activity. Like, they definitely want this to be something common. The board members, and we've looked at a lot of board decks, they ask every time metrics and reporting, what should we talk about? And it's been constant in the dialogue for 3 years, and it is definitely improving. They definitely like the comparative view. We've seen 8 decks. We don't share anything naturally, but we've seen a lot of the way that the boards are talked to, I guess you'd say, and we're getting there. But man, it is slow, and Tim and Ron, they have to work within that every day, and it's a challenge.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. So we have 2 questions left. I don't know if we have time for them, but Kevin, I'm going to follow up with you after so that we can get Amir a question about his Russian cyber attack. And I believe this is a question from Fred. Fred, we'll get you an answer here about your board meeting minute question shortly, but we'll have to handle that offline. I hope that's okay. If you have other follow-up questions, if you're on the call, you have other follow-up questions, feel free to email the team here, and we're more than happy to answer them offline. Also, this is a great opportunity to build a little community and camaraderie. In the emails that we were sending out to market this webinar, there were links over to our attendees' LinkedIn accounts, and they've invited you to connect with him on LinkedIn and participate in the conversation there. Feel free to follow up with them after. And then we host these webinars probably once every 4 or 5 weeks. So if you get another email from us, feel free to join that one. We'll have another round of amazing panelists to answer your questions, talk about relevant topics, and continue the conversation forward. In the meantime, thank you very much for your time today. Kevin, I'll turn it over for final thoughts over to you, sir. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Daniel. So Chris, Ron, and Tim, thank you very much for today's insightful dialogue. It's very, obviously the challenges are there and it's ever changing within the world that you guys are all living in, and we're all, what we're experiencing as, with our respective companies. For all the participants that attended today, thank you very much. And, keep your eyes open for your emails. You'll be getting a copy of this webinar sent to you, as well as I'll be looking to follow up with you for any question you may have in regard to Sertainty and our capabilities.
Thanks,
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.